Hello again, YouTube. This is a different video than my normal videos. Normally when I do a deck tech, I do it about a legacy deck that I currently play. When I play, it could be with, cousins, or maybe a friend, or maybe the odd tournament that I get to go to every once in a while. People always kind of ask, why do you play this deck? Why do you, why did you play this? Why are you playing this? Why are you playing Mana Denial, or why are you playing this combo instead of that? And it is kind of hard to just say, well, because I learned how to play Mana Denial years ago. Because then they want to know, well, what deck did you play years ago to teach you Mana Denial? Or what deck did you play years ago to teach you, hardcore, mono blue control style playing? So these are deck techs that are not going to be in my actual Magic the Gathering deck tech playlist. These are going to be deck techs that are historic for me, because these are decks that I've actually played. I've played them. They may have been standard at the time, or they may have been extended legal at the time. But these are decks that I've played, and they helped me grasp a lot of different concepts. It could be the concept of a prison deck, a Mana Denial deck, a hardcore control deck, an aggro deck, a combo deck, what have you. But we're going to start out with one of the funnier ones, which actually taught me how to play very, very good Mana Denial strategies, which does help when I'm playing Death and Taxes in Legacy. This, if you don't know what it is Mono Blue Pirates. The pirate creature type, I believe it came out in Mercadian Masks. I might be wrong. I'd have to check. I know Pirate Ship was a very old card from the Dark, if I'm not mistaken. But the actual pirates themselves as like a real creature type that you would use only came out in the Mercadian Mask block. And the whole purpose was Mana Denial. So you see we have Rishadan Footpad. Bleh, sorry. He comes into play, each opponent. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't say target opponent, so it doesn't target, it just says each opponent sacrifices a permanent unless they pay 2. And then we have Rishadan Cutpurse, which does the same thing for 1. They gotta pay 1 or sack a permanent. So this is the Mana Denial deck. Now, what you would do is you would basically, I'm gonna run through the cards really quick. Our primary kill card, Morphling. I mean, if you are hardcore about Magic the Gathering, you know about Morphling. It was one of the best creature cards ever printed. It has 5 abilities. You can untap it. You can give it flying. You can give it can't hit target spells or abilities. A +1/-1 or -1/+1, so you can just pump the ass end for just a huge amount of defense. Or you can give it flying, can't be targeted, and make it a 5/1 and end the game in 4 turns. Now, I started playing around Ice Age block. I got out when Urza block came out, and I was playing Accelerated Blue. 5 mana cost for this many abilities. That was brutal. Accelerated Blue, I could get this out on turn 3. This was not Legacy back then. That was Standard. That was what we called a Type 2 back then. That was fast. And it was just, it wasn't fun anymore for me, so I got out. But that's our primary kill. Secondary kill is Parallax Tide. Comes in with 5 fade counters. During your upkeep, you remove a counter, or you can choose to remove a counter and remove a land from the game. Now, when all the counters are removed, all the lands come back into play. Why does that kill people? It kills people with Ankh of Mishra. Whenever a land comes into play, Ankh of Mishra deals 2 damage to that land's controller. Now, basically, it was called the Ankh Tide combo. 1 Ankh of Mishra, 1 Parallax Tide, 5 lands that your opponent has you remove from the game. You gotta sacrifice the Tide, hits the yard, triggers, all the lands come back, all 5 now trigger Ankh of Mishra, and you have 10 damage right there in 2 cards. And it's mono blue. That was pretty amazing back then. But most of the time, you would use Parallax Tide to remove a few lands from the game, say 2 or 3 from your opponent. Drop a Rishadan Footpad, they'd have to sacrifice a permanent. Where you drop a Rishadan Cut Purse, they'd have to sacrifice a permanent. This was the mana denial package on the creatures that would force your opponent to sacrifice creatures, enchantments, artifacts to that effect. Now, I ran a single capsize in case the game got long. I could not imprint this on an Isochron Scepter, but if I had 6 mana, I could just bounce it, buy back, and just keep bouncing lands or creatures that you could get out. Now, what was hilarious was we had Capsize to bounce your lands, Boomerang, and Hoodwink. Now, Hoodwink can bounce anything but a creature. We didn't have Planeswalkers back then, so we really didn't care. And then we had Echoing Truth, which we primarily used it against just random creatures, but against tokens it was just brutally effective, and only 2 counterspells. Now, the hilarious thing about how this deck was actually funny as hell to use was we would put Hoodwink or Boomerang on Isochron Scepter, and every single turn, bounce your land, bounce your land. Every turn, you play a land, bounce it. You play a land, bounce it. That was what we did. Okay, this deck was able to take advantage of the simple fact that you can only play 1 land a turn. Unless you had Exploration or some other ability on a creature or a spell that you cast that lets you just put more lands into play. If we got an Isochron Scepter out off of a Chrome Mox on turn 1 with a Boomerang or a Hoodwink, we'd keep you at 1 to 2 mana for the whole game. Now, on top of that, we also had our Stifles. Some people ran 2 Stifles, some ran them in the sideboard, but most of the time you had people that had at least 2 in the main deck, and they would also run probably 2 Gilded Drakes. Now, when I was playing this in Extended, the biggest problem I had was a Twiddle Desire combo, and I really needed 4 Stifles, so I just took the Gilded Drakes out. I think I put 2 in the sideboard, but that was primarily what I needed. Number 1, if you watch my YouTube videos, you probably know I play Legacy. If you're hardcore Legacy, you know Stifle will murder a fetch land. It's a 1-mana Stone Rain, basically. But here's the amazing thing about it. If your opponent had a lot of land, like let's say your opponent was able to actually get land in play, you stifle Parallax Tide. You stifle the Leaves Play trigger. So you remove 5 land, stifle it, your opponent gets none of their land back. That's it. That basically you now have for 5 mana in mono blue, you took 5 land out of your opponent's game. That was brutal. To help the mana denial package, we also have 4 Rishadan Ports and 4 Wastelands. Now, I have to state that when this deck was actually played in Extended, the most expensive card you would actually be purchasing was Morphling. That was the most expensive card. It was I think it was like $25 to $35 or $40. That was it. Rishadan Ports were maybe $25 at the store where I bought them, and Wastelands were $10 back then. These were not very expensive cards. They were not very expensive. I mean, Rishadan Ports now are getting up to $80, $90, something like that, damn near $100 or something. Wastelands are around 60, 70. But you also have to remember you got the player reward foil, which I got one of those there, and then you got the judge rewards. You have more wastelands in circulation than Rishadan Ports. Plus, in the same situation, you have cards like Dust Bowl and Ghost Quarter that kind of do a similar thing like Wasteland, but not really. Whereas there are no other lands that I know of that do the exact same thing as Rishadan Port. So that's kind of why the port is more expensive, even though it's from a more relatively newer set. Tempest came out, so we had Tempest Block, which was the Wrath Cycle, then Urza Block, then Mercadian Mask, where Rishadan Port came out. Which, it does kind of explain why the port is more expensive than the Wasteland. Now, for your mana, we have our 10 islands, 3 chrome boxes, and our 1 secondary win condition, Fairy Conclave. Now, I would have to say you would win the game one of 3 ways. Morphling Beatdown through denying your opponent of mana. The Ankh Tide combo, where Ankh of Mishra would just deal an assload of damage to your opponent and you'd be able to get it off twice. Or your opponent would just concede. You'd use your Wastelands to wipe out their non-basics, your Rishadan Ports to tap down their lands, an imprinted Boomerang or Hoodwink on Isochron Scepters, and then you would kind of just, drop a Cut Purse here or there, drop a Footpad here or there, and just, boom, oh, you got 1 creature into play? Well, sacrifice it now. And, a third of the time you would just gain a concession. They would just scoop and say, I can't win. Especially if you played like Red Deck Wins, which, it was like mono red aggro base. It's basically mono red aggro. But, back then it was, we're old extended, man. We're talking Jackal Pups and some really powerful stuff, basically, for mono red back then. Now, your sideboarding for this deck, it depends on where you're going. You could go Arcane Laboratory for anti-combo. Back then, you were always going to have some form of heavy red deck in the format, heavy red deck wherever you're going to play. So obviously you'd have Chill. Affinity was a deck that was out there, and you had Energy Flux that you could still run. I think I had 4 Chills, 3 Energy Fluxes, a couple of Gilded Drakes in the board, and that's all I remember. But this was a very, very funny. It was a very, very funny deck. I mean, you're playing a deck that's called Pirates, and you're playing with creatures that are pirates, and it's mono blue, and it's hilarious. I mean, you have pirates, you have a tide, you have a port. I mean, that's kind of just hilarious the way the deck was put together that way. I mean, I think it was just hilarious the way it came out. It was just so funny. But this taught me a very, very hardcore style of mana denial strategy. And it wasn't land destruction. It was just denying you of mana, tying it up with Rishadan Ports and Wastelands and Parallax Tide Stifle, just removing it from the game, or just using Parallax Tide and then say Footpads and Cut Purses to just, hey, guess what? Gotta sacrifice something, dude. Might as well be that creature you just played. I know it's nice, but you gotta get rid of something. But it was a fun deck to play. It really was. Because it was just really, really hilarious. I mean, it was basically mono blue land destruction if you want to be serious about it, because you would just basically just keep bouncing their lands. And this taught me a lot of stuff on mana denial, and that did help greatly now that I play Death and Taxes, because although the play style is different, Death and Taxes is primarily a creature-based strategy with the mana denial of Wastelands and Ports and Thalias and Flicker Wisp and Mangara included, but it does work into mana denial. And a deck like this, if you were to pick it up and learn how to play it, I mean, if you play Legacy and you're hardcore Legacy, you probably have Wastelands and Rishadan Ports already. Stifle isn't that expensive. I mean, if you already have those three right here, Stifle, Port, and Wasteland, the most expensive thing you would get would be those three right there, and they're like $10, I think. Chrome Mox is not that expensive. I mean, it's a really, really cheap deck to put together. I'm pretty sure you could probably get a bunch of these cards just simply by just asking a friend of yours, hey, do you got any of these? I need them. Because nobody plays this stuff anymore. Maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody will have it in Highlander deck. I know, now that I've said that, somebody's going to comment like, yeah, I got it in my Highlander deck. But this taught me mana denial. It taught me how to deny my opponent of mana, how to deny them of utilizing their mana, and it really helped when I started picking up Death and Taxes and playing it. Because I just said to myself, it's just like playing Pirates, except you're using creatures instead of boomerangs, and you're using white mana denial versus blue. You're relying primarily on the synergy between stuff like Thalia, Port, Wasteland, and Mangara, and the Aether Vials, instead of just, Scepter, Boomerang, Footpad, Port, and Parallax Tide Stifle. So I recommend, if you really, really want to learn about a little piece of Magic history, some old school extended, you pick up Mono Blue Pirates, and you just play it casually. This is like legal casually for Legacy. So if you guys do casual Legacy, this would be a legal casual Legacy deck. I mean, take out your Morphlings and put Air Elementals in if your friends are really, really annoyed. Still, it's not going to matter because you're still going to win probably. But this is Tristan Blaze, and this is one of my first. This is the first historic, deck tech that I've played, and has taught me a lot about Magic. Taught me how to be a better player. And, this is going to be a playlist of decks that I recommend. I recommend, you go pick this deck up, learn it. It's going to make you a better Death and Taxes player. So this, in my eyes, and my experience, will make a better Death and Taxes player out of anybody. Because it teaches you the mana denial strategy. And it's cheaper to buy anyways. So if you're on the fence, I recommend Death and Taxes, obviously. But, you got some money left over, tinker around with this deck for a bit. You'll like it, probably. Once again, Tristan Blaze. And if you want a lot more of these deck techs, I'm planning to put more out, but I don't know how many I'm going to do. But if you want a lot more, man, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.